Amid the golden sands of the desert, where the sun kisses the dunes and the wind sings tales of power and wealth, lives Sheikh Zayn al-Malik, a man with an immeasurable fortune. He is known as the King of Sapphire due to his dominance in the gemstone industry. However, behind all his luxury, Zayn harbors a deep void, the absence of an heir to continue his legacy. Meanwhile, in a forgotten corner of a nearby city, Nora struggles to survive. Once a talented pianist, her life took a devastating turn, leaving her with nothing, no family, no home, no dignity. Living on the streets, she clings to a hope that feels increasingly out of reach. Fate is about to intertwine their paths in a way neither could have anticipated. A meeting that begins with an unusual proposition will unravel a story of unexpected emotions, unspoken truths, and life-changing decisions. Their journey begins here, and the outcome will leave you speechless. The Al-Shamar Palace was a hidden jewel in the desert, a paradise surrounded by palm trees and encircled by crystal-clear fountains that seemed to defy the scorching heat. It was here that Sheikh Zayn al-Malik spent his days, managing an empire that spanned from gemstone mines to cutting-edge technological ventures. Despite all the luxury, something deeply troubled him. Sitting on his balcony overlooking the endless horizon, Zayn held a golden crescent-shaped pendant, a keepsake from his mother. "What is all this worth if there's no one to share it with?" he murmured, closing his eyes. Zayn had been married before, but the relationship ended in tragedy when his wife passed away in an unexpected accident. Since then, he had distanced himself from emotional commitments, focusing solely on his business empire. But his family, especially his father, constantly pressured him. He needed an heir, and he needed one now. During a formal dinner that evening, his friend and advisor, Tariq, brought up an unexpected idea. "Have you ever considered hiring someone?" Tariq asked, pouring wine into his glass. Zayn raised an eyebrow. "Hiring? What do you mean?" "Someone outside your circle. Someone uninterested in your power or wealth. Just fulfill the purpose." Zayn leaned back in his chair, pondering the suggestion. An absurd idea, but intriguing nonetheless. He knew that a child would change everything. An heir would not only secure the future of his lineage, but also fill the emptiness he had carried for years. For the first time in years, Sheikh Zayn al-Malik considered a solution as unconventional as his empire was vast. Zayn spent days contemplating the idea Tariq had suggested. The plan seemed straightforward. Find a woman outside the spotlight, someone who neither belonged to the elite nor harbored ambitions for status. But how would he identify the right person? He decided to act swiftly, instructing Tariq to begin a discreet search. Meanwhile, Zayn tried to rationalize the decision. What could possibly go wrong? It would be a purely professional agreement, devoid of emotional entanglements. After all, he had a reputation to uphold. A week later, Tariq walked into Zayn's office carrying a stack of documents and a determined expression. "Sheikh, I believe I found someone who meets all the criteria." Zayn frowned as Tariq placed a photo on the desk. It showed a woman sitting on a sidewalk, dressed in tattered clothes, with a distant look in her eyes. "Who is she?" "Her name is Nora. She used to be a pianist, but lost everything a few years ago. She has no family, no ties, and currently lives in a shelter." Zayn studied the photo again. There was something about Nora's eyes that intrigued him. It wasn't just sadness, it was resilience. "Bring her here, but do it carefully. I don't want her to know who I am yet." Nora sat on the steps of the shelter, trying to fend off the biting cold of the night. She had long since learned not to expect much from life, but she still clung to a hope that seemed increasingly distant. At that moment, a well-dressed man with a friendly demeanor approached her. "Nora, right?" he asked, offering a slight smile. She eyed him suspiciously. "Who's asking?" "My name is Tariq. I represent someone interested in helping you." She laughed bitterly, her disbelief evident. "Helping? You're in the wrong place, friend." But Tariq remained composed, his tone calm and steady. What if I told you there's an opportunity to change your life, to leave all of this behind and start anew? Nora hesitated. The last time she had heard something similar, she ended up losing everything she had. What do you want from me? Just one meeting, nothing more. Curious but cautious, Nora agreed. It was a decision born more of desperation than hope, but she had nothing left to lose. The next day, a luxurious car pulled up outside the shelter. Nora had never seen anything like it up close. She climbed into the vehicle, still unsure, and was taken to an upscale hotel where she would meet Zain for the first time. As she stepped into the lobby, she saw a tall, imposing man in impeccable attire with an overwhelming presence. It was him. Even without knowing his true identity, Nora sensed that this man would change her life forever. Zain rose and extended his hand. "Nora, it's a pleasure to meet you." She hesitated before shaking his hand. "Who are you?" "Someone willing to make you a proposal that could change everything for you." Sitting in a luxurious hotel suite, Nora listened intently as Zain explained his proposal with calm precision. He described the arrangement as a professional contract. She would receive an astronomical sum of money in exchange for carrying his child. After the birth, she would be free to leave, financially independent and able to rebuild her life. Nora was stunned. "You want me to have a child for you?" she asked, trying to process the idea. "Exactly. And before you ask, it's completely legal and confidential." She shook her head in disbelief. "Why me?" Zain met her gaze directly. "Because you have nothing to gain beyond what I'm offering. You're not part of this world and have no reason to manipulate the situation." Nora felt the weight of his words. She could finally escape the misery she had endured, but the idea was so surreal that she didn't know if she could trust him. "What if I say no?" Zain leaned back, his voice soft but firm. "You're free to leave, but I believe this opportunity could be as beneficial for you as it is for me." What should have been a simple decision became a dilemma for Nora. The proposal was undeniably tempting, but she knew that accepting it would change her life forever. "Give me time to think about it," she said, her voice trembling. Zain nodded. "You have 2 days." As Nora left the meeting, she grappled with the enormity of the choice before her. What would she do? The morning after accepting Zain's proposal, Nora woke up in a room unlike anything she had ever seen. The bed was so soft, it felt like clouds, and the silk sheets caressed her skin. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But as she opened her eyes, she realized her reality had drastically changed. That morning, Tariq knocked on the door to deliver Zain's message. She was to undergo a transformation to adapt to her new environment. "The Sheikh believes you should feel like you belong in this world," Tariq explained, as a line of stylists, hairdressers and specialists entered the room, ready to work their magic. Nora, though hesitant, allowed them to begin. The following hours were a mix of discomfort and awe. Her tangled, dull hair was treated with rare oils and styled to perfection. Makeup artists accentuated her features in a way that felt both natural and striking, while stylists presented her with clothes from luxury brands she had only ever seen through store windows. "I don't even recognize myself," Nora murmured as she gazed at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was elegant, poised, and mysterious, but something in her eyes remained unchanged, a mixture of vulnerability and determination. Tariq escorted her to the hotel garden where Zain was waiting. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he was just as imposing as the first time she saw him. When his gaze landed on her, a faint smile crossed his lips, though his demeanor remained formal. "Impressive," he remarked with a slight nod. "You're ready for the next step." "The next step?" Nora asked nervously. "You'll move to my palace tomorrow," he said, his voice steady. "There's much to prepare before we can begin." She took a deep breath, still trying to process the whirlwind of changes. This new life was as fascinating as it was intimidating. Sensing her hesitation, Zain added, "I understand this is a big leap for you, but I want you to know, all of this is necessary. You're not just carrying a child, you're becoming part of something far greater." Despite the coldness in Zayn's tone, Nora caught a glimpse of humanity in his gaze, as if he too was stepping into uncharted territory. When the meeting ended, Nora returned to her room, where she spent hours staring out the window, watching the city lights. She wondered if she was truly ready for what was to come. By morning, the palace awaited her. The private jet carrying Nora to Zayn's palace landed smoothly on a secluded airstrip in the middle of the desert. As she stepped out, the heat seemed to shimmer on the horizon, and in front of her, the Al-Malik Palace rose like a mirage. Its golden towers reflected the sun, and its domes of jade and marble gleamed in the harsh light. Nora was speechless. This world was so far removed from anything she had ever known that it felt almost cruel. "This palace is more than just the Sheikh's home," Tariq explained as they approached the massive gates. "It's the heart of his empire. Many vital decisions and negotiations take place here, and now it will also be your home." As they entered, Nora was greeted by the intoxicating scent of flowers blooming in the palace's inner gardens, a stark contrast to the arid desert air. Water cascaded down an elaborate fountain adorned with precious stones, and the sound echoed through hallways lined with intricate mosaics. Nora noticed the many staff members bustling about. They seemed busy but attentive, bowing their heads slightly in acknowledgement as she passed. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being judged. "Do they know who I am?" Nora whispered to Tariq. "They only know that you are a guest of the Sheikh," he replied. "But here, rumors always find a way to spread." Zayn awaited her in a private chamber decorated with ancient tapestries and museum-worthy furniture. He stood as she entered. "I trust the journey was comfortable," he said in his usual composed tone. Nora nodded, still overwhelmed by her surroundings. "This place is surreal." A faint smile touched his lips before his expression turned serious. "Nora, before you settle in, there are a few rules you must understand." Her stomach tightened. She had expected this. "I'm listening. First, your presence here must remain discreet. The contract is confidential, and no one outside this palace can know about our arrangement or our connection. Understood? Second, while you will have access to most areas, some doors are locked for a reason. Do not attempt to enter them." The curiosity in Nora flared, but she nodded. "All right." "Third," Zayn paused, choosing his words carefully, "if you have any questions or concerns, come directly to me or Tariq. Asking anyone else could be perceived as a weakness. And in this world, weakness is not tolerated." The weight of his words pressed heavily on her. It was clear that this was not just a simple contract. There was much more going on in the palace than she could begin to understand. After their conversation, Zayn left, and Nora was guided on a tour by Samira, a maid assigned to assist her. Though courteous, Samira seemed guarded, maintaining a professional distance. As they walked, Nora's eyes were drawn to a set of double doors, adorned with golden arabesques, unlike anything else she had seen in the palace. "What's in there?" she asked, pointing to the doors. Samira hesitated before answering. "That is the Sheikh's private wing. No one enters without his permission." Nora lingered for a moment, intrigued, before following Samira down the corridor. The palace was a paradise, but she knew it was also a maze of secrets. And somehow, she felt that sooner or later, avoiding those locked doors, both physical and metaphorical, would be impossible. The weeks following Nora's arrival at the palace were a whirlwind of adjustments. Her days were filled with etiquette lessons, cultural training, and sessions to help her understand the customs of the region. Samira and other specialists guided her, teaching her the intricate details of palace life, from interpreting the ornate designs on the walls to understanding phrases in Arabic. "The Sheikh values perfection," Samira explained one afternoon. "Mistakes are not tolerated." Nora struggled to keep up, feeling like an outsider in a world that demanded so much. Yet she pushed herself to adapt, driven by a growing determination not to let this unfamiliar environment break her. One morning, as Nora strolled through the palace gardens, she stumbled upon Zayn. He stood near a fountain speaking into his phone, his face marked by the usual sternness. When he noticed her, he ended the call abruptly. "Nora," he said, walking toward her. "How are you finding the palace?" She hesitated before replying. "It's overwhelming, but I'm managing." Zayn nodded thoughtfully, studying her face. "Come with me," he said suddenly. Without much choice, she followed him to a balcony on one of the highest points of the palace. The view was breathtaking. The endless expanse of desert stretched before them, the sun casting golden hues across the horizon. "This is my favorite place," he admitted, leaning on the railing. "When I need clarity, I come here." Nora was surprised by his openness. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He turned to her with a faint smile. "Even surrounded by all this, I sometimes feel like something is missing." Nora recognized the feeling. Before her life had fallen apart, she too had felt an emptiness, even when everything seemed perfect. "I know what that's like," she said, meeting his gaze. His brow lifted in curiosity. "You do?" She took a deep breath. "Before, I had a completely different life. I was a pianist. I traveled, performed at concerts. But no matter how successful I was, there was always something I couldn't find. And when I lost everything, I realized I may never have had it to begin with." Zayn was silent, processing her words. "Do you miss that life?" "Every day," she admitted. "But I've learned to accept that some things are gone forever." For the first time, Zayn seemed to truly understand her. In the days that followed, Zayn began including Nora in small aspects of his life. He invited her for walks in the gardens, shared brief moments during meetings, and even allowed her to observe his dealings with some of his advisors. These moments weren't part of the original agreement, but they brought them closer. Nora noticed that Zayn seemed to appreciate her candidness, a rarity in his world of sycophants and calculated moves. One evening, while dining on a terrace under the stars, Nora caught him off guard with a question. "Why did you choose someone like me for this?" Zayn set down his glass of wine and looked at her directly. "Because you're different. You don't belong to this world, and that makes you unpredictable. But now, I think I chose you for a reason I didn't understand at the time." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. For the first time, she wondered if Zayn saw her as more than just a part of their arrangement. Still, she knew there were walls around his heart that might never come down. Yet under the desert stars, the connection between them felt undeniable. As Nora adjusted to her life in the palace and her bond with Zayn deepened, shadows of her past began to resurface, threatening to upend everything. One quiet afternoon, Nora wandered into the palace library, a grand room filled with rare books and ancient manuscripts. She was running her fingers along the spine of an old leather-bound volume when Tariq entered, his expression unusually serious. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Nora turned, her curiosity quickly turning to apprehension. "What is it?" Tariq hesitated, clearly trying to find the right words. "We've received some concerning information about your past." Her stomach dropped. She had always known her history wasn't irrelevant, but she hadn't expected anyone to dig so deeply. "What kind of information?" "There are rumors about your family," Tariq said carefully. "That you didn't just lose your career, but that there's more to the story, something you haven't shared." Nora's breath caught. Her hands trembled and she tried to mask it, but Tariq's sharp eyes didn't miss her reaction. "Who told you this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter who," Tariq replied. "What matters is that Zayn needs to know if these rumors are true." Nora turned away, her mind racing. The weight of her past, which she had fought so hard to bury, now threatened to resurface. "Tariq, this has nothing to do with the contract," she said, trying to sound convincing. Tariq crossed his arms, unconvinced. "Nora, the Sheikh trusts you. Don't put him in a vulnerable position." Before she could respond, the door opened and Zayn entered. His gaze shifted between Nora and Tariq, immediately sensing the tension. "Leave us," he commanded Tariq, who obeyed without question. Zayn approached Nora, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Nora felt the walls closing in. She had no choice but to tell him the truth. "There's something about my past I haven't told you," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm listening," Zayn said, folding his arms. Nora took a deep breath, forcing herself to face him. "I had a younger sister. Her name was Amina. We grew up together, but when the financial crisis hit my family, we lost everything. I did everything I could to support her, but—" She paused, her voice breaking. "But what?" Zayn pressed. Tears welled up in her eyes. "She got sick, and I couldn't afford the treatment. She died because I failed her. After that, I lost control. My career crumbled and I ended up on the streets. It felt like a part of me died with her." Zayn's face remained impassive, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Sympathy, perhaps. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked. "Because it didn't seem relevant," she said, wiping away a tear. "I accepted this contract to get a second chance, but Amina is a ghost I can't escape." Zayn was silent for a moment before speaking. "We all carry ghosts, Nora, but we can't let them control us." His words held a weight that made her wonder what ghosts he carried. Despite the tension, Zayn's tone softened. "If your past doesn't interfere with the present, I have no reason to doubt you. But from now on, I need complete honesty." Nora nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. "I promise." As Zayn left, Nora stayed behind, gazing out of the library window at the endless desert. Confessing her past felt like a burden lifted, but it also left her vulnerable. In the palace, even the smallest secrets could be used against her, and yet she couldn't help but feel that Zayn, with all his mysteries, understood her pain better than anyone else ever could. The days following Nora's confession were marked by a fragile calm, but beneath the surface, tensions in the palace were rising. Nora tried to focus on her routines, but the whispers and judgmental stares from the staff became impossible to ignore. During a formal lunch with influential businessmen and regional leaders, Zayn noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The usually cordial exchanges were replaced by furtive glances and veiled comments. Nora, seated beside him, maintained her composure, but she felt the weight of their scrutiny. After the event, Tariq approached Zayn privately. "Sheikh, there are rumors spreading about Nora," Tariq said, his tone low but urgent. Zayn frowned. "What kind of rumors?" "About her past, her presence here, and the pregnancy," Tariq replied. "It seems someone has leaked information." Zayn's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Who's behind this?" "We're still investigating," Tariq said carefully, "but there's evidence pointing to someone inside the palace." Zayn clenched his fists. He knew the importance of maintaining discretion. A scandal could damage his reputation and put Nora in danger. "Find out who it is," Zayn ordered coldly, "and make sure they understand the cost of betrayal." Nora began to sense the shift as well. The once subtle glances from the staff grew more overt, and conversations seemed to hush whenever she entered a room. One evening, as she walked alone through a corridor, she overheard two maids talking in hushed tones. "She doesn't belong here," one said. What was the Sheik thinking, bringing someone like her into the palace? Nora's heart sank. She stepped back quietly, her chest tightening with a mix of anger and hurt. Later that night, Tariq came to her room, his expression unusually grim. "Nora, I need to ask you something," he said. "What now?" she asked, exhaustion clear in her voice. "Have you told anyone outside the palace about your arrangement with Zayn?" Tariq asked directly. Nora looked at him, offended by the question. "Of course not. Why would I jeopardize myself like that?" Tariq sighed. "We believe someone is using you to attack Zayn. Rivals are likely behind this, but we don't yet know how they got the information." "Why me?" she asked, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Because you're an easy target," Tariq said bluntly. "You're not from this world, and people assume you're weak. But this isn't just about you, Nora. It's about the Sheikh's position, his power. Any sign of vulnerability can be exploited." Nora felt the weight of his words settle on her. She wasn't just a woman living under Zayn's protection. She was now a pawn in a much larger and more dangerous game. The next morning, Zayn called for an emergency meeting with his closest advisors and staff. Everyone gathered in the grand hall, their faces tense with unease. Standing at the head of the room, Zayn's presence commanded silence. "Someone here believes they can act against me and my household without consequences," he began, his voice sharp and unyielding. "That ends today." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Tariq stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "We've conducted an investigation into internal communications. We've identified the individual responsible for leaking information and spreading rumors." He pointed toward one of the palace assistants, a man who had worked there for years. The man's face turned pale as guards moved in to detain him. "You don't understand," he protested. "She doesn't belong here. She's going to ruin everything." Zayn approached him, his gaze icy. "Bringing a threat into my home was a grave mistake," Zayn said, holding the letter that Nora had received. "And attempting to harm someone under my protection will cost you dearly." As the guards escorted the man out, he shot a venomous glare at Nora. "You'll never be one of us," he spat, before disappearing from sight. That evening, Zayn found Nora sitting in her room, staring at the letter she had received. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than she expected. "I don't know," she admitted. "Why would someone hate me so much just for being here?" Zayn sighed and sat down beside her. "This world is full of people who will do anything to protect their power, even if it means destroying others. You were an easy target because you're different, but that doesn't mean you don't belong." Nora looked at him, her eyes searching his. "And what about you? Do you think I belong here?" Zayn hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," he said firmly. "But I also know that staying here means danger. For both of us." "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Zayn stood, pacing the room. "It means I have to make a decision about what's best for you, for Yasmin, and for the future." Nora felt a chill run through her. Whatever Zayn's decision was, it would change everything. The tension in the palace hung thick in the air, and Nora could sense the weight of Zayn's internal struggle. His words lingered in her mind. "I have to make a decision." She spent the night in restless thought, unsure of what his next move would be. The following morning, she found Zayn in the palace's private garden, seated on a marble bench beneath a sprawling tree. He seemed lost in thought, but when he saw her approaching, he straightened. "I've been waiting for you," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Nora hesitated before sitting down. "What's going on, Zayn? You've been distant since all of this started." He exhaled deeply, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You've been dragged into a world that was never meant for you, Nora, and I can't ignore the danger it's putting you in." "Are you saying this is my fault?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "No," Zayn replied quickly, his tone softening. "This isn't about blame. It's about protecting you and Yasmin." Her breath caught at the mention of their unborn child. "So, what are you saying? That I should leave?" Zayn's jaw tightened, and he looked away, his voice measured but laced with conflict. "I don't want you to go, but keeping you here might put you at risk, and I can't allow that." Nora felt a surge of anger rise within her. "You can't just decide what's best for me, Zayn. I made a choice when I accepted this arrangement, and I'm not going to run away just because things are hard." He turned to her, his expression softening as he saw the determination in her eyes. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," he admitted. "I've had to be," she said, her voice firm. Zayn fell silent for a moment before speaking again. "The contract will remain in place, but I'll do whatever it takes to ensure nothing else happens to you." Nora's anger eased, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. "And what happens after Yasmin is born?" she asked quietly. Zayn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and turned toward the horizon, his back to her. "Let's focus on the present for now," he said, his voice distant. Nora's chest tightened at his evasiveness, but she knew this wasn't the time to press further. That evening, Zayn took additional measures to secure the palace. He increased the number of guards and implemented stricter protocols for anyone entering or leaving. The traitor had been removed, but Zayn wasn't willing to take any chances. However, this did little to ease the whispers among the staff. Nora continued to feel their judgment, their eyes following her wherever she went. She kept her head high, refusing to let them see her fear. One night, as she returned to her room, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Her heart sank as she opened it, fearing another threat. But this time the letter wasn't hateful. Instead, it bore a single line in elegant handwriting. "Stay strong. Not everyone in this palace is your enemy." Nora stared at the note, her mind racing. Who had sent it? And why? The palace, with all its opulence, felt more like a labyrinth of secrets with each passing day. Months passed, and the once intimidating world of the palace began to feel more familiar to Nora. Her growing belly became a constant reminder of the life she was about to bring into the world, a life that, for better or worse, would be tied to Zayn forever. Zayn's involvement in the pregnancy surprised her. He attended every medical appointment and insisted on being updated on her health daily. Though he remained guarded in many ways, his commitment to ensuring her safety and comfort was undeniable. But the palace remained a place of tension. The whispers about Nora had quieted but not disappeared. She often wondered if she would ever truly belong. The long-anticipated day arrived suddenly, with Nora being rushed to the palace's private medical wing as labor pains began. Zayn was by her side, holding her hand as she breathed through the pain. "You're doing well," he said, his tone steady, but his face betraying his concern. "This is your fault," she snapped between contractions, causing a rare, brief smile to cross his face. Hours passed in a blur of tension and exhaustion, until finally the room filled with the sound of a newborn's cry. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the baby gently into Nora's arms. Nora's vision blurred with tears as she looked down at her daughter. Yasmin, wrapped in a soft white blanket, was small and perfect, her tiny face serene. Zayn, standing close by, seemed frozen for a moment. Slowly, he stepped closer, gazing at his daughter with an intensity Nora hadn't seen before. He reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek. "She's beautiful," he said softly, his usual composure giving way to raw emotion. For the first time, Nora saw a side of Zayn she hadn't thought possible, a man capable of deep love and vulnerability. As Nora cradled Yasmin, Zayn's voice broke the silence. "She's the future of my legacy," he said, almost to himself. Then he looked at Nora, his gaze steady. "And I'll do whatever it takes to protect her." "What about me?" Nora asked quietly. Zayn hesitated, his jaw tightening. "You're her mother. That makes you part of this, whether you planned for it or not." The words offered a glimmer of reassurance, but Nora knew their journey was far from over. The bond between her and Zayn was shifting, but she still felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on them both. That night, as she sat by Yasmin's cradle, Nora realized how deeply she had come to care for this little girl, and for Zayn. But would he ever truly let her in, or would she remain a mere part of an arrangement that had already served its purpose? In the weeks following Yasmin's birth, the atmosphere in the palace began to change. While the routines of royal life carried on, a subtle shift had taken place. Nora found herself spending more time with Zayn, not just as co-parents, but as individuals beginning to understand each other on a deeper level. Zayn, once distant and composed to a fault, became more open in small but significant ways. He often joined Nora in the nursery, watching Yasmin sleep or feeding her in the quiet hours of the night. Their conversations, initially formal and perfunctory, grew more personal. One evening, Nora caught him staring at Yasmin with a contemplative look. "She's changed you," Nora said, breaking the silence. Zayn glanced at her, his expression softening. "She's changed everything," he admitted. "But I don't regret it." Nora smiled, feeling a flicker of hope that perhaps Zayn could let go of his need for control and allow himself to embrace the life they were building together. But amidst the moments of tenderness, A question loomed over Nora's mind. What would happen to her now? According to the original agreement, she was free to leave after Yasmin's birth, yet the thought of parting from her daughter and Zain felt unbearable. One afternoon, Nora gathered the courage to ask him directly. She found him in his private study, poring over documents. "Zain, have you decided when I should leave?" she asked. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to leave?" Nora hesitated. "No, but I don't want to stay if I'm not truly a part of this." Zain leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I thought keeping you here would make you vulnerable. But I've come to realize that pushing you away would be a greater mistake." Her breath caught at his words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you to stay," Zain said, his voice firm but laced with vulnerability. "Not because of Yasmin, but because I don't want to do this alone. And because I want you here, with me." Nora's heart raced as she searched his face for any trace of hesitation, but there was none. "I'll stay," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling inside her. "But only if we're in this together, completely." Zain nodded, and in that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. As the weeks turned into months, Nora's place in the palace solidified. Though the whispers of judgment persisted among some staff, Zain's unwavering support silenced most dissent. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Zain stood with Nora on the balcony overlooking the dunes. Yasmin cooed softly in Nora's arms. "This place used to feel so empty," Zain said, his voice soft. "But now, it feels like a home." Nora looked at him, her heart full. "Maybe because it finally is one," she said. Zain turned to her, a rare smile gracing his lips. "For the first time, I think I have everything I've ever wanted." As they stood together, the vast desert stretching endlessly before them, Nora felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Their journey had been far from conventional, but it had brought them to a place of unexpected belonging. What would you have done in Nora's place? Could you trust someone like Zain and take a chance on an uncertain future? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.